the conqueror of the Old Northwest, the Washington of the West, the founder of Louisville, General George Rogers Clark. Hey everybody, this is Russ from Family Tree Nuts, and I'm at George Rogers Clark National Historic Park here in Vincennes, Indiana. On the banks of the Wabash River, George Rogers Clark was born in 1752 near Charlottesville, Virginia. But due to Native American attacks, his family moved further east. He was taught at a young age by his grandfather to be a land surveyor. As a young man, only 19 years old, he took his first surveying trip into Western Virginia. And then in 1772, he went into the frontier country of Kentucky. That's 3 years before the settlement at Harrodsburg or Boonesboro. In 1774, he served as a captain of the Virginia militia in Lord Dunmore's War. In 1776, he was sent as a delegate to Williamsburg to propose that Virginia adopt Kentucky as a county of Virginia. In the year of 3 sevens, in 1777, there was tremendous amount of Native American attacks on the settlements in the Kentucky region. These Native American attacks were encouraged by the British because the colonies by this time had entered into the Revolutionary War. The colonial army could not spare any troops to Kentucky to protect the settlements. So George Rogers Clark petitioned the Virginia governor, Patrick Henry, to allow him to take the militia on a secret mission to invade the Illinois country. The Illinois country was the main staging point for the Native American attacks. In 1778, he set an outpost out at the Falls of the Ohio on Corn Island. Now this outpost eventually became the city of Louisville. Although he had requested about 500 troops, he ended up with only about 175. And he led these men to take 3 British outposts, Cahokia, Kaskaskia, and Fort Sackville, here in Vincennes. After taking Fort Sackville, GRC went back to Kaskaskia to set up his command post. The British Lieutenant Governor, Henry Hamilton, also known as the Hair Buyer, took Fort Sackville back. But GRC, with some help from some important spies, took Fort Sackville back again, and this time capturing Henry Hamilton. They sent him as a prisoner of war all the way back east to Williamsburg. In 1780, the British encouraged more Native American attacks on the frontier. And George Rogers Clark once again led men above the Ohio River, this time into the Ohio country, capturing Native American villages around modern-day Springfield, Ohio. George Washington then assigned George Rogers Clark to sack Fort Detroit. But plans for the invasion fell out when the reinforcements that were on their way to George Rogers Clark were defeated and captured. Governor Patrick Henry then promoted George Rogers Clark to Brigadier General of all the Virginia militias in the Kentucky and Illinois territories. In 1782, the British once again encouraged Native American attacks on the frontier. This time it led to the militia's defeat at the Battle of Blue Licks. Clark responded once again, leading troops above the Ohio River into the Ohio country. This time, they took many Native American villages along the Miami River. This was the last major expedition of the Revolutionary War. Treaties were soon made with the Native Americans, but bands continued to attack settlements along the frontier country. Yet again, in 1786, GRC led men above the Ohio River. This time, they attacked Native American settlements on the Wabash River. This was a horrible expedition. The men almost mutinied, and George Rogers Clark was accused of being drunken on duty. George Rogers Clark is a man that has been criticized in modern day for his attacks on Native Americans. It's another example of how it's hard to hold men of yesterday to standards of today. History always has at least 2 sides. George Rogers Clark now moved into Indiana near modern day Clarksville. It was at this time in his life that he had tremendous financial issues. He had borrowed money for his campaigns into the Illinois and the Ohio country, but due to his unsatisfactory record keeping, the Virginia government would not reimburse him for his debts. However, he was awarded 150,000 acres in Indiana for his service, but he didn't have the money to develop it. In 1793, he offered his services to France to attack Spanish settlements along the Mississippi River. France made him a major general, but then President George Washington forbade Americans from getting involved with the war of Spain and France. It was a conflict of their neutrality. President Washington threatened to send General Matt Anthony Wayne to stop George Rogers Clark from getting involved with the war. The French ambassador was called back to France and the mission was called off. The French, just like the Virginians did not reimburse GRC for the expenses that he incurred for the exhibition. Clark lost almost all of his land to his creditors and only kept a few acres and operated a grist mill in Indiana. In 1803, he moved to a small retirement cabin on the banks of the Ohio River. It was at this time that his brother William Clark started recruiting men in Louisville for the Corps of Discovery and their secret mission to explore the newly purchased Louisiana Territory. You know that as the Lewis and Clark Expedition. In 1809, he suffered a stroke and fell into his fire at home. He was burned severely, especially on one of his legs that had to be amputated, and it left him partially paralyzed. He then went to live with his sister and brother-in-law, Major William Croghan, at their plantation, Locust Grove in Louisville, and there he lived out the rest of his days. In 1812, Virginia awarded him a pension of $400 a year, which is about $8,500 a year in today's money. They also presented him with a ceremonial sword for his service. In 1818, General George Rogers Clark suffered a second stroke and died. He was buried at Locust Grove, but in 1869, he was moved to a family plot at Cave Hill Cemetery in Louisville. He's buried next to several family members, including General Jonathan Clark, who was second in command under General Lincoln and was at the Battle of Brandywine, Monmouth, and others. He was actually captured and was a POW. Also, another brother, Captain Edmund Clark, and several other Clark family members. His youngest brother, William Clark, of the Lewis and Clark Expedition, is buried in St. Louis, Missouri. After his death, the state of Virginia awarded his estate $30,000 for the expenses that he incurred on his expeditions. More debts were found as time went on, and the last payment to his estate wasn't until 1913. There are several things all over the place named for George Rogers Clark, including counties, towns, and schools. This monument here at Vincennes is at the location of one of his biggest conquests, Fort Sackville. The monument is granite and has 16 Doric columns. Inside the monument is a 7.5-foot bronze statue of George Rogers Clark. The statues are surrounded by 7 murals of Clark's adventures. Each mural is 28 feet tall and 16 feet wide. Each one of the murals took artist Ezra Winter and 6 assistants 2 years to complete. The murals are Kentucky, entering the Great Valley; Cahokia, peace and war with the Indians; Vincennes, the British barrier to the west; Fort Sackville, Britain yields possession; Marietta, the Northwest, a new territory; and St. Louis, the way open to the Pacific. Other statues near here are of Francis Vigo, the Italian-born merchant who worked as a spy for GRC, and Father Pierre Guibault, the Patriot priest. For a man that had so much success early in life, he died a simple man and is forgotten by so many Americans. We aim to keep this great patriot's legacy alive. So here we are at the monument of General George Rogers Clark, the conqueror of the Old Northwest. And remember, family tree nuts, let our nuts find the nuts in your family tree. Like what you see? Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to click the little bell so you get notifications as to when we post new videos. And you can find out more about us and contact us at familytreenuts.org.